Topping today's news, a 9-year-old killed in yet another traffic fatality here in the country. FTX expected to pay employees, except for those here in the Bahamas. There is a possibility of bridge tolls to Paradise Island increasing, and the Bahamas Public Service Union takes issue with the government over alleged unilateral decisions in negotiations for the industrial agreement. Good evening, Bahamas. I'm Jcn News. This is your JCN Evening News. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Following a concerning number of traffic fatalities in the country within the past few weeks, police are appealing to motorists to drive with due caution, care, and attention, and for pedestrians to be vigilant as you use the streets as we approach the Christmas holiday season. Tragically, a family is mourning the loss of a young member after a 9-year-old boy was involved in a traffic collision which unfolded at 6 p.m. on Tuesday. Police reports indicate that at the time, a flatbed truck towing a trailer was heading west along Kwaku Street off East Street, and the child who was riding his bicycle also heading west along Kwaku Street when the two collided. The young victim was taken to hospital in a private vehicle where he later succumbed to his injuries. Police are encouraging members of the public to know where your children are at all times and to educate them on the dangers of riding their bicycles competitively against motor vehicles. Police are actively investigating. Failed cryptocurrency exchange FTX is resuming post-bankruptcy payments to employees of the company, with the exception of its founder and former CEO Sam Bankman-Fried, or employees of FTX Digital Markets headquartered here in the Bahamas. International online news media Cointelegraph indicates that FTX's new CEO, John Ray III, made the announcement on Monday as the insolvency professional looks to help FTX and its approximated 101 affiliate companies, FTX debtors, navigate their way through the U.S. bankruptcy court in Delaware. Mr. Ray is quoted as saying, "With the court's approval of our first day motions and the work being done on the global cash management, I am pleased that the FTX group is resuming ordinary course cash payments of salaries and benefits to our remaining employees around the world." Further, according to the new CEO, FTX is also making cash payments to selected non-U.S. vendors and service providers where necessary to preserve business operations subject to limits approved by the bankruptcy court. Now, this announcement means that those employees and contractors that remain with FTX will be receiving nearly 3 weeks back pay, which is presumed to have been halted after the company filed for bankruptcy on November 11th. According to Mr. Ray, in the Bahamas, where the crypto exchange is headquartered, only employees and contractors of the FTX debtors will receive relief, but not those who work for FTX Digital Markets, which is subject to a separate liquidation process in the Bahamas. It is also not applying to Australian-based employees and contractors for FTX Australia and its subsidiary FTX Express, which are also subject to separate proceedings in Australia. After a long back and forth with a subsequent standstill of negotiations over a new industrial agreement between the Bahamas Public Service Union, the BPSU, and the government, the union is speaking out and responding to the most recent happenings involving public service workers. BPSU President Kimsley Ferguson says there are issues being addressed that the union have not been consulted on, particularly concerning salary increases and proposed increased allowances for various categories of public servants.
The document that prefaced that information indicated to permanent secretaries, directors, and head of departments for implementation. The concern today that we do have is, if it was proposed, when was it discussed and agreed to on behalf of public servants? And so we are indeed very concerned that the government has decided to unilaterally implement particular things into the agreement. We are not saying that the government cannot pay monies, but being the sole bargaining agent for public servants and being the president of the Bahamas Public Services Union, we are confirming to date that we have not met with the government to sign off on any particular item in the industrial agreement.
BPSU President Ferguson goes on to explain that while an agreement was presented in 2018, there were a number of financial issues that were to be discussed and agreed upon, which has not occurred. He added that his union does not plan to sit idly by and let the government dictate and implement what they want to into the industrial agreement. Mr. Ferguson further explains that by way of responsibility allowance, increases have been implemented to permanent secretaries, directors, and others. However, he notes that a BPSU proposal for an allowance of $3,600 for finance and accounting officers was dismissed without consideration.
It was agreed that cabinet secretary, financial secretary, permanent secretaries, directors, and so on will receive a $6,000 increase, inclusive also of the singular increment plus their normal increment, which amounts to some $8,000 as an annual increase, divided by 12, gives them a $666.67 monthly increase. The annual increase, it almost exceeds the salaries of persons at minimum wage. And if the government is in possession of this type of funding and refuses to bring the individuals at the lower end of the scale to a point where they can be competitive with the cost of living, we are indeed concerned.
BPSU President Ferguson, in closing, reiterated that no negotiations have taken place between the government and the union, adding that the increases to salaries is not a notion that the BPSU will be signing off on carelessly. Pending assessments for the Sydney-Poitier Bridge and the Paradise Island Bridge, there may be an increase in toll fare, but not for just regular vehicles. A new bridge toll for heavy-duty equipment vehicles could be underway, according to Chairman of the Bridge Authority, Basil Longley. Mr. Longley says the assessments are forthcoming to monitor the impact heavy equipment vehicles are having on the bridges. He says this could also lead to weight restrictions.
If the weight is not a violation or does not cause a problem, it's not causing a problem with the bridge, then certainly, well, over time, everything would create a problem. But certainly we may need to look at fees, adjusting fees to deal with that, right? I mean, because the truckers are running a business, they're making money, right? And all of this waste and everything else traverses the bridge, and it is having an impact. We know that for sure. The amount of impact, we don't know, and that's what the study will reveal. And then coming out of that study, if it means that we need to put some things in place to ensure that we boost the revenue a bit to be able to do the work that we need to do to maintain the bridges more effectively and more securely, then we would have to.
Those studies will take place within a few weeks, according to the chairman. The Sydney-Poitier Bridge, constructed in 1998, making it 26 years old, while the original Paradise Island Bridge has been in operation since 1966, now 56 years old.
When, for example, when construction is going on, right, there'll be demolition of buildings, and then you would have trucks coming over empty. When they leave loaded, right, with concrete, steel, everything on it. We don't have any way of monitoring the weight of those vehicles now. Common sense would tell us that, that is something that's critical and we need to do it. And the consultants would then advise us as to the extent of what we need to do, how we do it, how we manage it, etc. So,
Mr. Longley insists the structure of both bridges is sound. He also insists that the possible hike in fees will not be across the board, but will only be focused on heavy equipment vehicles or vehicles carrying heavy equipment. In this next report, we hear from experts from the Perry Institute for Marine Science on the state of affairs as it relates to mangroves and their potential value if monetized as carbon credits, which is a goal of the government in its efforts to raise funds to combat the effects of global warming. For the first time in the nation's history, we now have a report card, so to speak, on the extent and value of the underwater world of mangroves that exist across the country. Under the guidance of Executive Director Dr. Craig Dahlgren, the Perry Institute for Marine Science released a first-of-its-kind report on November 25th on the health of the Bahamas' valuable but often underappreciated mangrove ecosystem. Dr. Dahlgren says the research was an extensive and exhaustive effort, uncovering some remarkably valuable facts about the mangroves in the Bahamas, both monetary and scientific.
The Mangrove Report Card for the Bahamas draws on years of research that we've done, utilizing drones, satellite-based surveys, and in-water surveillance from hundreds of sites across the Bahamas. In the Bahamas, mangroves are extremely important. Their value is estimated to be about $3.2 million per square mile per year, and that's because of their ability to protect shorelines, to shelter important fishery species, and sequester huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. And in that carbon sequestration, what we're talking about is how the mangroves remove carbon dioxide from the air and they bury it in the sediments through their roots, removing it from the air, reducing greenhouse gases that cause global warming.
The ability of mangroves to remove carbon dioxide from the air is a natural activity the Bahamas seeks to monetize in its carbon credit talks with world leaders. Dr. Dahlgren, an expert in tropical marine ecosystems, led the local and international team of scientists. He said they chose to use a rating scale to assess and place value on the various mangrove habitats because a rating scale provides a more accurate interpretation of the state of mangroves, which varies from island to island based on natural variability and human impacts.
In assessing local mangrove forests, we evaluated 5 key health indicators: the area that the mangroves covered, damage to those mangroves, whether they were fragmented, the diversity of fish living in the mangroves, and the value of the mangroves as a nursery for important fishery species. The first 3 of these indicators, mangrove area damage and fragmentation, were derived from satellite imagery across the Bahamas, and data for the last 2 categories came from in-water assessments from over 265 mangrove systems throughout the country.
Using a letter grading system, each island was given a grade, with most family islands receiving a B, with Abaco and Grand Bahama because of Hurricane Dorian in the vicinity of C- or D+, but improving, and New Providence receiving a D based on loss of coastal mangroves over the past 50-plus years. Most of the mangroves in the Bahamas are on Andros, although 50% of those on Andros are dwarf mangroves, which are less valuable than the tall mangroves. Dr. Dahlgren also explains the negative impact of what he describes as split mangroves.
Among our observations, we also noted mangrove fragmentation. And what I'm talking about here is where mangrove ecosystems, mangrove habitats, are split in half by roads or other obstructions that block the flow of water. So mangroves on one side remain fairly healthy, but on the other side, their condition deteriorates. This has an adverse impact on biodiversity. It makes flooding worse in some areas, and it puts the lives and property of people at greater risk during storms.
According to Dr. Dahlgren, the Bahamas is second in the region only to Cuba when it comes to vast mangrove ecosystems with 612,000 acres of mangroves. We'll have more on this report in a later newscast. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.